Since the New York Times published the sexual harassment allegations against Harvey Weinstein almost 2 years ago, more than 80 women, 80, have come forward accusing the Hollywood movie producer of sexual misconduct. Weinstein has denied any allegations of non-consensual sex and has pleaded not guilty to sexual assault charges in New York, where he is set to go on trial in January. This was such a huge story and opened the doors. Joining us now, the two reporters who brought to light the allegations against Weinstein, which is widely seen to have sparked the Me Too movement. Pulitzer Prize winners and investigative reporters for the New York Times, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. They are co-authors of the new book, She Said, Breaking the Sexual Harassment Story That Helped Ignite a Movement. And once again, congratulations on the book and these stories. Joe. So
I just want to ask Jodi and Megan, just sort of a view from 30,000 feet on that movement that was started. You know, as Woodward and Bernstein were to Watergate, you two obviously were in large part the Me Too movement. How much of that movement do you think was fueled by not just your reporting, but also the election of Donald Trump and the charges against Donald Trump that basically went ignored? Have you all talk about that? Have you talked about that over the past couple of years? How much did that add toxicity to the environment that made a lot of women decide, I have to come forward?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, what we're doing in this book is we're trying to bring you to the forefront of these events, behind the scenes. We're showing you the original communications with sources, the texts and the emails, because this story has turned out to mean so much to so many people. And in regards to Trump, on the one hand, there was certainly a rising tide of frustration by women about these allegations. Megan was actually one of the first reporters to talk in print about Trump allegedly crossing the line with women, and Megan covered those women's complaints and then watched him be elected. So certainly we watched, you know, we're journalists, not activists, so we watched the Women's March from afar as it played out in January 2018. But then a few months later, when we were on the phone with sources about Weinstein, the Trump factor kind of cut both ways for them. On the one hand, they could certainly feel that there was something in the air, that there was this rising tide that also had to do with Bill O'Reilly, that also had to do with Bill Cosby. But then on the other hand, what some sources said, Jodi, Megan, I can't go on the record with you because it doesn't matter when you tell these stories. Donald Trump was elected president anyway, and why should I take the risk of airing these problems publicly when nothing changes when you do?
You guys write, Megan, about the system set up to protect Harvey Weinstein. I'm curious about overall culture and how much culture has changed as this story was broken and so many others came tumbling down as well. What walls did you hit in your reporting on this story, and what walls were you able to break down?
Yeah. So one of the things that we realized was that our first article on Harvey Weinstein was really just the beginning. We had started to piece together, connect some of the dots, and since then we've been able to piece together so many other pieces of the puzzle. And I think that what's come into sharper view was this machinery that was in place to silence the women and try to block our investigation. That included some surprising figures like the feminist attorney Lisa Bloom. There was also, we wanted to probe the question of complicity. You know, there were individuals and institutions who glimpsed Weinstein's behavior over the years and saw the allegations of misconduct against him. Individuals, institutions, including his own company. And we really pushed in to try to examine who knew what when and what did they try to do, including Weinstein's own brother, Bob Weinstein, who opened up to us for the first time to talk about the role, the enabling role that he played. And another thing that we wanted to examine was the issue of secret settlements. These apply not just to some of Weinstein's victims, to victims of sexual harassment and sexual assault across the country. So often women will come forward and say, you know, this just happened to me, I want to do something about it. it, and their lawyers all too often will steer them into these settlements in which they basically are silenced in exchange for money. They're told that this is the only option. So many of the women that we went to as we were trying to track down this story were legally prohibited from telling us what had happened to them. And those systems are still in place today. So I think that while there has been a lot of cultural shift, and Weinstein was ousted from his own company, he's going to be going on criminal trial, there still are a lot of systemic questions that we all have to grapple with.
Jody, one of the big headlines that's jumping out of this amazing book that's out today, she said, is that Gwyneth Paltrow was a key to your investigation. She was on the inside, had a long professional relationship with Harvey Weinstein, won the Oscar with him, of course, for Shakespeare in Love. Can you talk a little bit about the role she played? Because we didn't know about it until you put it in the book.
And we were very surprised by it. When we started this investigation, she was barely on our list of people to call because she was the first lady of Miramax. And also, you don't really think Gwyneth Paltrow victim. And we also never thought we would be able to reach her. And so lo and behold, a few weeks into the investigation, we got a tip. And not only was she very honest with us and she confided in us this story she had held close for a long time, which is that at the very start of her career, when she had two important roles on the line, what she says is that Weinstein sexually harassed her. He tried to end a meeting, a sort of conventional business meeting, by suggesting that they go into the bedroom for massages, but he threatened her, which is just as important, because what we all have to understand about this story is that the theme with Weinstein is the allegation of using work as a tool of coercion. And so she was very worried that she would lose these roles. She felt she had to be silent for a long time. So not only did she tell us this story at a time when very few people in Hollywood were willing to pick up the phone to us, but she really helped our investigation. She politely asked me for tips on investigative journalism, and we talked about who she should contact, and she set about all of that summer contacting other actresses who she thought might talk to us. Even for Gwyneth, it was very hard to get people to talk. And also, Weinstein became increasingly obsessed with the question of whether she was speaking to us or not. At one point, we got a series of panicked phone calls and texts from her because he had shown up early to a party at her house, and she was hiding upstairs in the bathroom, afraid that he was going to try to confront her.
That was an extraordinary scene, that story you tell, where he gets there early, right? Before was he even invited to the party?
He was not invited to the party.
He wasn't invited to the party, but he shows up at her house.
So he invited himself, basically,
right.
And so she called me when she knew that he wanted to come. This was, I don't know, a week or two ahead of time, and said, "What should I do?" And as a reporter, you can't really tell your sources what to do, but you can sort of, just sort of hear them out. And what she decided is, she said, "I'm going to let him come to the party because otherwise it's a tip-off that I'm talking to you." So I was very nervous that day in general about how things would go. And then lo and behold, he shows up early, and she's feeling very frozen, very sure not what to say. And also, as a journalist, we're not necessarily looking at her as this huge celebrity. We're looking at her as a dead center source who has a lot of information, who can potentially go on the record. So for Meghan and I, we were very worried because we thought, we're going to lose her. She's not going to stay committed to this. But lo and behold, she did. She was very afraid to go on the record for the first story, but she was right there for the second story. And I think her coming forward had a really big impact, both because of her stature and also because of something really disturbing we all found out later, which is that many Weinstein victims say that he had invoked Gwyneth in the course of harassing or assaulting other people.
Well, good for her for stepping up and doing that. And Meghan, it speaks to the power of Harvey Weinstein that even Gwyneth Paltrow, this person we see as this famous, accomplished, beautiful, wealthy actress, presumably powerful in Hollywood, even she had reservations about crossing him.
That's absolutely right. I mean, there was a moment where we weren't sure if we were going to get anybody on the record. I mean, we were 3 months into our reporting when we had sort of a hushed meeting with our editor over a drink at a bar in Midtown Manhattan one night, and we spelled out all the information that we had gathered, decades of allegations of predatory behavior by him. And she said, "Is anybody on the record?" And at that point, we had to say, no, not yet. And she said, well, you don't have a publishable story. So another thing that we wanted to do was to just to illustrate the power that this man had to maintain secrecy, like this cloak of secrecy, for years.
So let me try the flip side of that, although I certainly don't want to be in the position of, because I think it's amazing that she shared that story and became such a helpful source to you all. But given her power on the international stage, why didn't she speak up sooner? Did she struggle with that?
It was hard for really everybody to go on the record. Nobody wanted to break the silence. In Gwyneth's case, part of what was hard was that she really wanted to do it. She had been very committed to the investigation all summer, but right before we published, we published a little sooner than we thought we would, and she went to a series of people in her life, close friends, close advisors, family members, and she said, okay, this is what I might do. Everybody close to her said, don't do it. And we understand that as reporters. There are so many good reasons not to go on the record. And in some sense, it's really unfair that women have to do this work. Women who are harassed and assaulted, as a rule, didn't do anything to cause or earn that behavior. So then why do they have to do the difficult work of making this big public statement, or even making a report in their own offices, which can be very difficult as well?
I want to understand, though, beyond sexually harassing her and trying to get her to move into a massage room, what kind of threat are we talking about?
So the threat was she was cast in Emma, which was a really big deal. That was a star-making role. That was a really substantial female lead. And she had been cast, but the movie hadn't been shot. And when he called her to berate her for having told Brad Pitt, who was her boyfriend at the time, what she says is that he threatened her and said something like, you're going to screw everything up. You're going to lose your whole career. This is going to ruin everything.
Wow.
And so like a lot of, she's a more famous example, but she has a lot in common with other Weinstein victims we've spoken to, because so many of them, including former assistants, they had ambition, they had dreams, they wanted opportunity, and so that is part of what Weinstein was able to exploit.
Weinstein's role manipulating the press is so central to this book and to why he was able to abuse and go along as a predator for so many years without notice until you really pursued the story. How was the media complicit in helping Harvey Weinstein clamp down on bad stories? And I know that he pressured you at the end and tried to keep you from airing your reporting and losing the scoop. So what role how can media better cover these kind of stories?
Well, listen, I think that's a great question. The American media, the parent company to National Enquirer, has received a lot of attention for the role that it played in helping Donald Trump cover up his sort of secret affairs with women, allegedly secret affairs with women, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. And what we realized in the course of our reporting, and one of the things that's come out, is that American media also helped Harvey Weinstein. It basically put to work some of its reporters to dig up dirt on some of the accusers that he thought might go public with allegations. So I think that's actually one of the most remarkable cases of complicity in all of this, and that American media should still be held accountable for that. And so when it came to Harvey Weinstein's attempts to bully the New York Times, I mean, he seemed to operate with a script. He came in with, high-powered attorneys, including Charles Harder, who had sued Gawker out of existence. He had David Boies by his side trying to pump the brakes on this investigation. And he also had Black Cube, this private investigative firm made up of former Israeli intelligence officials that basically had a contract against us, that it was going to get paid, as much as $300,000 bonus if it could put a stop to our investigation. But in the end, the New York Times and the facts won.
Given the culture that we're all a part of, people read these stories. It had impact, obviously, a huge impact on our culture from people reading them. But people, I think, also assume that, boy, all this happened in the past year or 2 years. This went on for a long, long period of time. If you could, talk about the protective screen around him around Harvey Weinstein. And I just happened to open the book. By the way, it's an enormously, unbelievably well-reported book.
Thank you.
I just happened to open it to a letter from Harvey Weinstein to David Boies about his daughter's movie career. That's part of what we're talking about, isn't it? That protective screen.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
David Boies had actually worked with Harvey Weinstein going back to 2002. I mean, he was, if you're looking at the assortment of lawyers who were by Weinstein's side, David Boies was the closest. He was the go-to person. His assistants have described him calling David Boies sometimes as many as 10 times a day.
Much more than a lawyer, too.
Much more than a lawyer. And we've known that. We've known that David Boies was there and that he was helping him spin and conceal the allegations against him, you know, as early as 2002 when the New Yorker was starting to piece together some allegations of sexual assault against him. David Boies went into the office and tried to successfully helped talk them out of it. And then even in 2015 when Weinstein's company was trying to scrutinize him and was increasingly concerned, David Boies was blocking them from looking at his personnel file. And we've sort of known that, but what we realized in the course of our reporting was that their relationship was much tighter than attorney-client. They also were discussing, David Boies was interested in getting into the film industry, and they even had these email exchanges in which they were talking about potential roles for Boies' daughter, an aspiring actress.
But, you know, I also want to point out that, I mean, Meghan is talking about you know, these sort of corridors of power, right? The movie business, high-powered lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also, I think, something so relatable about this material for the rest of us that deals with our own offices and our own lives. Another document in the book is this really pleading letter from Bob Weinstein, Harvey's brother, that Meghan obtained. And it's super brother to brother. It's super private. Bob Weinstein is confronting Harvey and saying, for all of these years, you have brought shame on our family and our company. You know, you haven't addressed these problems. He's talking about a variety of problems, including workplace abuse, but he also he uses the word sexual. He talks about, you know, your wife and children. So he clearly appears to be referencing sexual transgressions as well. And I think there are just questions for all of us about, you know, if you see something that's wrong, what do you say? How do you say it? How far do you need to go? Where do you stop? And that's a genuine moral dilemma that we see cropping up in these Me Too cases again and again and again.
And Bob sent that letter in 2015, a couple of years before your reporting. So obviously this was on a lot of people's radar before you even brought it to light.
Well, that's right. It was one of the pressing questions when we came out of the first Weinstein story. This was his brother, his only sibling. They ran two companies together. They were in business together for decades during the time that he was engaging in this alleged predatory behavior. What did Bob know? When did he know it, and what did he try to do about it? And so it was, you know, slowly but surely he opened up to us in a series of interviews in which he was able to explain that he, yes, was aware of allegations of sexual harassment and sexual assault against his brother. He, like many people, chose to believe Harvey when he told him that it was extramarital affairs and nothing more, and that he was also informed by, he also adopted a rationale that was rooted in his own personal experience with substance abuse and recovery, which was that he chose to view his brother's problem as sex addiction. And so in this 2015 letter, intimate letter that he writes to his brother, he's pleading with him to get treatment for sex addiction. And but clearly we produced that letter in its entirety so that readers can see for themselves and ponder the question of what do you do when you get glimpses of a problem, and how do people become complicit?
This is incredible. NBC News reached out to Harvey Weinstein for a reaction to the new book and received a statement from his defense attorney that reads in part, quote, she says, is all you need to know to appreciate that this book contains one-sided allegations without having adequately investigated the facts of each situation. There is very different side to every story. Yeah. So the one thing I'll say is that you all have created a space that created more spaces for women to come forward and actually tell their stories. And that has been one of the most important parts of this movement is is giving women the space to speak out. The book is She Said, Breaking the Sexual Harassment Story That Helped Ignite a Movement. Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Good to have you on. Coming up, another new polling out this morning showing Joe Biden with a double-digit lead over his 2020 Democratic rivals. Those new numbers are ahead. Plus, President Trump and his allies say the ongoing trade war is not affecting Americans, only China. But why then is the USDA paying billions of dollars, billions, to American farmers for trade relief? We'll talk about the effects of the trade war and signs of a possible recession with Stephanie Ruhle next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.